money, but if they collect taxes, they put that money in the bank. If they write a check and take it out of their bank account, no effect. But if they don't have a bank account, then it goes to the Bank of Canada, and once they do it, there's nothing more.
Okay. Is everybody semi-ready? Are we all semi-awake? Drive a semi-truck to semi-here. We're gonna be doing a whole bunch of different things during the weekend, and I want to make some agreements with you before we begin. And I would like everybody, these are very simple agreements. I don't ask anybody to do anything for me that they wouldn't do for someone they don't like. So they're very simple. Agreement number one, and I'd like everybody to give me an explicit yes, I will agree to this. I want you to agree that it doesn't matter whether or not you like me, whether or not you agree with any one particular one thing I say. You promise to take whatever you find useful and use it. Can you make that agreement? Would everybody agree with that?
Yeah.
Everybody agree? I didn't see some hands go up. All right. I make that agreement because there's this attitude that if you're not perfect, there's something wrong. I know people that go to movies to find things wrong with them. The movie was no damn good because of this and this and this. All right? There are going to be some things here you will not agree with, and it's all right not to agree with them. That's fine. Not every method, not every approach works for everybody. I've watched Brenda use some techniques that I can't use, that are very effective communication techniques. I've watched Mark Emerling do things that I can't do, simply because I have good taste. I'm teasing. Something you need to know about me and Mark Emerling is that Mark attended a workshop I did, I think in 79 or 80 or 81. And Mark and I engaged in some bantering contest. And have you ever engaged in banter with Mark? Has anybody here ever engaged in it? All right. Well, this is the first time in his life he got shut down. And it was like, I think he had sexual impotence problems for about, like a day. It really interfered with his functioning.
That explains why he's not bantering back with you when
Oh, actually,
he's too smart to get into it again.
Well, yes and no. Yes and no. Because Mark is one of the quickest minds I know. He's a very, very bright, outgoing, vivacious person. And I respect what he does. He does some things that I wish I were better at doing. And he does some things that I wish no one would do. But that's okay, because I don't have to love everything that Mark does, or everything that you do, or everything you do, to value you as a person. And I want to make that same agreement about the workshop, because I've had people go, well, you were wrong on this issue, therefore everything you say is suspect. Look, it's like a cafeteria. Okay? When you go to a cafeteria, you don't have to buy everything on a menu. You pick what you like, you eat it, and hopefully it's good. Well, this is a gourmet restaurant. So enjoy whatever you find useful. Now, there are a few things that I'd also like you to feel comfortable to do. You're welcome to take notes. You're welcome to use anything in here you want, in any article, in any paper, in any future work. All right? I don't copyright this material deliberately. I have no desire to be the smartest miser in the communication business. There's no profit to it. Sharing, there's an advantage to it. Because to tell you the truth, I'm investing in you. I had people at different times in my life that invested in me, spent time with me, and shared skills that I didn't have. And as a consequence, I got better at doing some things that I couldn't do at the time. I want you to be aware of that, because sometimes people get into the I'm right, you're wrong game. Bad game. Doesn't work. Not effective. Find what you like and use it. Now, you can use any of these methods and any of these techniques. I'll name them from time to time, and we'll go from section to section to section. Any particular technique is not dependent on any other technique. Pretend this workshop is a toolbox. And I'm going to share with you different kinds of tools. We're going to have screwdrivers and ratchet wrenches and hammers and saws and lasers. And we're going to have little hand grenades too. It's a great toolbox. Find the tools that you find useful in your communication and use them. Try them out. Now, one thing that happens, and this happened last year, or 3 years ago, over at Brenda and Bob's house, is that when everybody partied, people were watching each other for using the techniques. Oh, you're not going to set me in. This used to be a problem for me for dating, when women would find out I was engaged in, I taught persuasion skills, Well, I have a lock on my bra, Buster. Well, excuse me. I'm sorry. So then I'd have to use a new technique to find the combination. So don't do that to me. This is just fun. Okay. Now, Those are the agreements. Are they pretty straightforward? You know, you're welcome to use anything here you want to use. If you want to attribute it, that's fine, but I don't have an ego problem on that. I stole some of this stuff just like you did. It works like this. Betty Crocker did not invent the ingredients of her cookies and candy and all that other stuff. What she did is she put it together in a recipe that works. Okay? The great chefs don't go out there and invent cows and invent new bouillon bases. They put it together in combinations that work. So I want you to feel very comfortable to steal what you like, use what you like, and try it out. Be experimental. Be willing to fail with these. The only way you stretch as a person is be willing to fail. That's the reason I've stretched so much. Me and Michael Jordan have stretched so much because I have failed on higher levels than other people. And it's all right to fail. I want you to know that it is okay to fail. Failure won't kill you, usually. And it can be kind of fun. Because you have people feel sorry for you when you fail and you get cuddles, and that's all right. All right, so those are the beginnings, all right? Now we're going to talk about meta-persuasion here. If you have a question, feel free to ask it, all right? If I want to continue in a line of thought, I'll ask you, hold that thought, and we'll come back to it. All right, but I'm here for you. I'm a resource for you. My motive is real straightforward and simple. I like the Freedom Party to succeed. I want what you do to work because your values are my values. I believe in these values, and I've been committed to them since reading Rand in 1969. And I got to tell you that unless we do a good job of communicating our ideas, we're in serious trouble. We're in serious trouble. You know, the kind of people that you've got in Canada, we're getting in the United States. And I want you to sort of visualize the U.S. being like 12 years behind Canada in terms of the kind of thug socialists we get. You know, gee, wouldn't it be a great idea if government ran everything? Oh yeah, it's a hell of an idea, I can hardly wait. So it's very important to us to succeed at this. Now, first thing we're going to talk about is meta-persuasion. Now, meta is a Greek word which actually originally came from Aristotle. Metaphysics was the section in his writing which was after physics. But in fact, what it means in philosophy is prior to or underlying, as in the sense of meta-ethics, or ideas you have to understand prior to ethics. Meta-persuasion is the stuff you need to understand before you sit down with people and go to work on it. It's sort of like, we hope your brain surgery knows basic skills before it gets inside your head. That's what meta-persuasion is. Now, there was an experiment done a number of years ago by a man named John Lilly. He was the guy that did the work with the dolphins. Remember Flipper? Does anybody remember Flipper? We'll start there. Again at the basics. Okay. All right. This is a guy that did the communication stuff with the dolphins. And John Lilly did something called sensory deprivation experiments. And what they did is they got people and they put them in what they call flotation tanks. Has anybody read about those things? Okay. Here's the way it works. They get people and they put them in water that is set at about 94 degrees, I believe the temperature is. What happens is that way the external temperature of the water and the external temperature of your skin are identical. You can't tell where the skin stops and the water begins. The tank is sealed so you can't see any light. And you also have your eyes covered, you have your ears covered. And you have your hands muffled so you can't feel things. What they've done is they've cut off your sensory input. Your eyes can't see, and your ears can't hear, and your fingers can't touch. And you're floating, so you disorient. Well, what happens is after about 20, 30, 40 minutes of sensory deprivation, your brain starts playing. It starts hallucinating. Now, what's interesting about this is that your brain gets bored real easily. Now, if you want some first-hand evidence, do you remember going to school? Yes. That was what your brain did because it was bored. Okay. Now, what happens with the sensory deprivation experiments is they got a lot of people and they said, what really happens when we cut off our senses? What happens when we don't look and don't listen and don't have a sense of touch? And what happens is the brain starts hallucinating. I want you to visualize Steven Spielberg and Walt Disney doing color movies inside your head. That is what sensory deprivation is. Or for some other people, you get Alfred Hitchcock too. Now, what does that have to do with persuasion? It's simple. Every day, we engage with our friends and our neighbors and our associates in sensory deprivation. We don't listen to what they say. We don't look at what they do. And we don't touch to actually feel what's going on. And you go, that couldn't possibly be true. That might be true of someone in this room, but it's not true of me. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's all true of all of us. Have you ever had an argument only to discover later on that you misunderstood what the person said because you weren't listening? Anybody ever been called on in class to answer a question that you didn't know was being asked? Now, if I wanted to really cheat, I'd watch and see whose hand didn't go up and ask him what the answer was. And I'd go, could you repeat the question? Now, anybody ever read in these novels? I love reading psychological novels, right? Because I think it's important to read novels that are deeper than my friends, right? I'm teasing. I actually have one of the smartest group of friends. That's my ultimate resource, is my friendship circle. You know, they saved my life so many times, I can't believe it. You read in these novels, it looks like this. Two people are in a room, and they've got these deep, intense stares that you see only in bad movies or French movies, which are usually bad movies anyway. And they have these intense stares, and you can tell from just a glance everything about that person's past. You can tell by a look on their face the whole meaning of their relationship to you. And what you'll see is the equivalent of a thought balloon in the novel. So-and-so, he looked me in the eye, and the look, ebbing up from deep within his soul, bespoke of anguish and anger, of hurt and pain. It showed that he needed someone to reach out to me. Stay tuned next week for Love's Passion. Well, I got news for you. You cannot tell a lot about people just by looking them in the eye. That's called mind reading. And I know you guys like Shirley MacLaine. It's okay. It's all right to think these mind readers like the amazing Crest can do stuff. But we try to read each other's minds every day. Now, we don't call it mind reading. We call it understanding our partner. We call it grasping the meaning. She looked at me with hate in her eyes. Excuse me, what'd you get, a computer readout? She snubbed me. How do you know? How do you know? All you saw is that she crossed her arms. Maybe she was bored. Maybe she wanted to go somewhere. Maybe she went home. You don't know. Because you didn't ask. You were engaged in sensory deprivation. Now you go, oh, yeah, that's somebody else. Maybe, but not me. Okay. Let me give you some tests. You know how to tell when you're engaged in sensory deprivation? You know how to tell when you're doing your own version of John Lilly? It's like this. It works. You can tell you're engaged in hallucinating or sensory deprivation when you're paying attention to what's going on in here instead of out there. Everybody's communicating with you all the time. But you have to look and listen and ask and touch and find out through your senses. Now, some people right now are looking at me in ways that I'm interpreting as being quizzical. Are they really quizzical? I don't know. I haven't asked them. Because I don't mind reading. Other than you, sir, and I think you have a very good mind. Now, when you're paying attention to what's going on in here, instead of asking them, when you don't check out, when you don't verify your beliefs about somebody else's intent. Have you ever had a situation go like this? I went into my boss's office and he sneered at me. Or you're looking at someone across the room and they look at you and they frown. And immediately, what do you say? They frowned at me. Has anybody ever done this? Don't lie. I know. I can read your minds. All you know for sure is they frowned and they were looking in your direction. For all you know, they were going back to a past experience with somebody else. You don't know they were looking at you. If you go ask them, a lot of times they go, oh no, I was thinking about my boss. He was no good, da da da. Or I thought about my ex-husband. I'm nearsighted. I couldn't see him. That's what you find out when you check your sensory data. Now, third test is when you fail to examine your sensory evidence. When you don't test, when you don't check, when you don't verify stuff. In this hard world of ships and shoes of sealing wax. Now, sensory deprivation and hallucination is a lot of fun. It can be a real kick. It's like daytime dreaming. And it's an interesting experiment. But I've got to tell you something. Coming to your senses, paying attention to what you see and hear and touch, that is a mind-altering experience. Now, as we go through the seminar, I'm going to come back and say, you're hallucinating. And you're going to go, oh, he's right, I am. And I'm going to go, you're doing a John Lilly. And you're going to go, ah, he's right, I am. And I'm going to go, I know what you're thinking. And you're going to go, ah, he's hallucinating. Matter of fact, that used to be my great pickup line in bars. Guys, you want a line that works with women? Here's a great line. Sit down next to a woman in a bar, hopefully a same-sex bar, and say to her, sit down, order a drink. Don't even order a drink, this is even better. Turn to her and say, I know what you're thinking. Now this is enough to anger any woman with good mind, okay? She'll turn to you and you'll say, you're thinking, why do these mind readers always bother me? And what do you call a policeman if I offer to buy him a drink? And then shut up. And about 6 out of 10 times they will buy you a drink just because it's a line they haven't heard. Now, that's free. There's no extra charge for that piece of dating advice. It works well for me. Or worked well for me. Anyway. Now, there are certain things that we all need to do before we can get into talking with people and get into communicating with people. Now, everybody here knows how to communicate. We do it every day. And most of us do it pretty well. If you didn't do it well, you couldn't have got your job. You couldn't have fallen in love. You couldn't have achieved any of your goals. Communication is as normal as breathing, right? Marshall McLuhan had a great line. He says, you know, I don't know who discovered water, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't fish. I don't know who discovered how to work communication, but most of the time it's not us, because it seems so natural, doesn't it, to talk and listen? It doesn't seem very natural. Let me tell you a story out of sports. Any of you guys, are there any guys who are over 30 in the room? Okay. Okay, Mark is going to lie. Do you guys remember when Billy Martin played Yankee baseball? Okay, Billy Martin, I remember him. He was a very mediocre major league player. He was not a good player. What happened is he didn't have the natural baseball skills of a Mickey Mantle or a Roger Maris or a Whitey Ford, or for that matter, a Yogi Berra. He didn't have the natural skills, so he had to make up for his lacks by tricks, learning certain techniques of catching a ball and hustling a little more. He had to make up for his lack of natural skill with specific techniques. Because he had to learn those techniques in order to be able to compete with these people, he was able to be a brilliant coach. Take a look at the best basketball players, the best football players, the best hockey players, the best baseball players, the naturals, the Willie Mays, the Louis Aparicio,s the Wayne Gretzky's. And while they are brilliant players, they are the worst coaches in the world. Every single natural good player has been a rotten coach. Do you know why? They don't know how they do it. It's natural. You ask Willie Mays how he picks up a ball? Willie Mays bought a Mercedes-Benz from the dealership I worked at. Okay? I could not resist. And I went over and said, so I asked him this question. I said, hey, Willie, I said, you're a great player, but, you know, with all kindness, you're a shit coach. I said, why were you a good player and not such a good coach? And he thought it over for a second. He says, maybe I was a good player because it came natural. Maybe I was a bad coach because it didn't.
You said that after you bought the car, of course.
Of course. You don't want to screw up economic transactions just for a certain cheap shot. And he sort of, I asked him because that puzzled me. And he came to the same conclusion that I did in his way, in his own, you know, just maybe I was good at that because it was natural, maybe I wasn't good at that because it was natural. The reason Billy Rose is a good coach and Bart Starr was a crummy coach, right, is because it didn't come natural. It did not come natural. He had to work for every little edge he got. He had to learn specific techniques. The best communicators in the world don't know how they do it. Best skiers in the world. Jean-Claude Killy. You ask him how do you do it, and he says, well, I just get on the slope and you know. Why do you think, does anybody here watch sports? Who watches sports? Folks watch, what are your sports? What do you like to watch? NFL. NFL, what do you like to watch?
Baseball.
Baseball?
Baseball. Hockey.
Hockey? Basketball? Do you watch the interviews afterwards? What was going through your mind as you hit that grand slam? Nothing. I was paying attention to the ball, you dork. I'm waiting for the guy to give him that line, you know. No, I was counting the attendance in the stands. What did they expect the guy to say? The fact of the matter is, these guys aren't, it's not like they're doing it by the numbers. Step 1, put your feet in the batter box. Step 2, hold the bat up. Don't rest it on your shoulder. That's improper. Step 3, lean into the pitch. They don't do it like that. It is all natural. It is all unconscious because it is so trained into their body. Do you think Bruce Lee had to think about every move before he made them? Do you think Baryshnikov has to halfway through a spin say, excuse me, shouldn't I point my toe a little more? It is natural. That can be a great difficulty with communication. What I'm going to do over this weekend is make the implicit explicit. I'm going to take the natural and make it a little bit artificial so that you can learn it even better. Now, any process that people engage in, any process, whether it's speaking, whether it's walking, whether it's athletics, whether it's a job skill, programming, any process can be turned into a procedure. A procedure is just a sketched out, identified process. A process by the numbers. And that's what we're going to do during the week. Now, here are a few things that you're going to need to do if you're going to be effective at persuading. I have noticed in people that are very, very good at communicating, and I'm lucky, I've worked with some of the best in the country, in the U.S. One of the problems about doing what I do is I keep getting job offers from people that offer me more money than God ought to allow. And it's always by the kind of people that I would not take money from. Now, how's that for a dilemma? The dilemma is like wanting sex so bad, you know, your teeth ache, and then finding out the person has a non-curable disease.
I don't want to stop you.
What? What? Run that by us one more time, Mark.
That's not a dilemma, that's just looking at high risk.
Only Mark would do cost-benefit analysis. Now, wait a minute. What's my life expectancy anyway? Okay, now, I've noticed that most of the people that are very, very good at communicating. Now, I'm going to talk about oral communication instead of written communication. A lot of these are transferable to written, and that's fine. But let me tell you why oral is important. All right. Most of our communication is done person to person, face to face, toe to toe, knee to knee, belly to belly, orally, by the spoken word. Have you ever noticed how the spoken word is far more powerful than the written word? You notice how good orators are in high demand and low quantity. Good salespeople in any field are few and far between. And they can command any price they want. Anybody that's ever good at selling, let me tell you something. People will give you more money than you can believe exists. And then, of course, the college-educated people who are working in the office bitch and moan because you're getting it. Oral communication is vital because you get immediate feedback. You know whether you're succeeding or whether you're not. And that's true in sales and it's true in communication. If somebody in the course of the communication, if you're discussing minimum wage, if you're discussing the draft, if you're discussing the homeless problem, you'll get very, very good feedback. Either they'll say something or they'll do something to let you know how you're doing. People let you know how you're doing all day and all night by what they say and what they don't say. How they say it and how they don't say it. And what they do and what they don't do. Now, there are three things that really good communicators always do. Number one, they know the specific outcome they want. They have a specific purpose in mind. When I go into a communication situation, I know up front what I want. If I'm sitting down with an attorney, like I'm a speechwriter, I sit down with attorneys all the time. Worthless people. Is there any attorneys here? Oh, good. Worthless people. There, I feel good about talking about this right here. Probably the best case for the death penalty I can think of. Now, joke of the day. Ready for my favorite attorney joke? What's black and brown and looks really good on an attorney? Pitbull. Okay. Hey, just an idea. You pass it on to your friends. An attorney told that to me. I said, I agree. Anyway, I'm sitting down. I know right up front what I want from the attorney. I know what skills I have to offer them. And I know I don't trust them financially because I've dealt with too many attorneys. I know I'm going to cash the check before I turn over the speech. I know right up front what I want to do for them and how I want to do it and what I have to offer. And the guarantees that I make. I always offer a money-back guarantee. I walk in knowing what I want. When was the last time you walked into a communication situation knowing what you wanted? Knowing the specific outcome you wanted to produce? Think about it. I don't want an answer. I don't want anybody to embarrass themselves. That's my job, to embarrass you. Your job is not to be embarrassed. You've got to know the specific purpose you're trying to achieve. Has anybody here ever done public speaking? Okay. When you gave a speech, Mark is a very, very good public speaker. Good style, good ability to work the crowd. Mark, when you stand up and you give a speech, you have a pretty good idea of what you want to communicate and who you want to communicate it to, right?
Yeah, my overall objective, yeah.
Okay.
It would be different on the one-on-one though, wouldn't it?
Sure, it would in fact. It's not like you sit down and you go, maybe you just want to get to know someone. It might be a general kind of thing like, I think I'll sit down and get to know Debbie Blair, all right? Interesting person to get to know. Ask her husband, he'll tell you she's an interesting person to get to know, but don't you get to know her too well or I'll bust in him out. And I say that with love and respect. Now, I can sit down and in a general way know that I just sort of want to get to know the person, all right? I don't have a specific objective like at the end of this communication, I expect the person to be very fond of the ground I walk on or give me money. You might have a very general outcome. But everybody that's good at communication knows the outcome they're going after, and they go for it. A baseball player goes out, and they don't just take a swing at the ball. They pull or push the hit. They know where they want to lay it out. The best ball players can put it in right field or left field. You've watched them. I have. And they do it with a high degree of consistency. Not always, because there are pitchers up there trying to make sure they can't. First thing they do is they know the specific outcome they want. Second thing that good communicators have is they got a lot of flexibility in their behavior. There was a hypnotist named Hilgard who, in the last century, did thousands and thousands of trance inductions of people. Has anybody here ever been hypnotized? Okay.
Trance induction?
What?
What's a trance induction?
A trance induction is an encounter with someone claiming to be a hypnotist where they enable you to go in a state of altered consciousness. What they would call a hypnotic trance into hypnosis.
Or a crack dealer.
Or crack dealer, yeah. That's true. That's to be distinguished from an NDP member who is a crap dealer. Now, I go by a theory. Never give a statist an even break. You don't want to encourage them. All right, now, what he did is he studied people's reaction to hypnosis. And he determined about 5% of the populace could go into a deep trance. That's the kind of trance where they could do stomach surgery on you and you wouldn't get upset. Another 15% could go into a moderately deep trance. That's the kind of trance where you would experience hallucinatory phenomena. You might bark like a dog or crow like a chicken if they gave you the post-hypnotic instructions, so on. Some of the other people were able to experience deep relaxation, and so on. And this was taken as gospel, the idea that only 5% could do this and 15% could do that, until modern-day researchers, mainly Milton Erickson, and Leslie Kroger, and some other people in the field, said, wait a minute, he only used one induction technique. All he knows for sure is that one induction technique he used, his one method of allowing them to be hypnotized, produces those results. What if other techniques enable us to give 95% people a deep trance? All right? And what Milton Erickson figured out, he was the premier hypnotist in the world just before he died, which is a good time to be a premier hypnotist, because if it's after you die, it really screws with everything. Now, Milton Erickson was able, if he couldn't hypnotize you using technique number 1, he used technique 2. If that didn't work, he had technique 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. He was loaded with techniques. All right. First thing an effective persuader needs to have is a lot of different approaches. I've got all kinds of approaches to communicate an idea. If approach A doesn't work, I'll try approach B. If that doesn't work, I've got C, D, E, F, G. Do you know how many different approaches I got? I don't know. I'm not done. And that's equally true of you. But, see, we have a problem. We all have a problem. Everybody here has this problem, with a possible exception of someone I won't name. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why is he reading my mind again? Now, what happens is, if we do something and it doesn't work, if I tell you something and it doesn't get through to you, do you know what I do? I do it again. It's always a good idea. If something doesn't work, do it again. Now, if it doesn't work the second time I do it to you, for example, let's take a small child. Clean your room, Johnny. And if Johnny doesn't clean his room, then I repeat it. Johnny, I said, clean your room. If that doesn't work, we should do it again louder. Johnny, clean your room. If that doesn't work, we should do it slower, as though he didn't understand it. I said to clean your room, Johnny, as though he doesn't understand diction. If what you do doesn't work, do it harder, do it longer. Do it in a laborious detail. If what you're doing doesn't work, do something else. That's a sentence I write down. I got it on my wall at home in front of my computer. You know why? Because if I don't get the results I want with my writing, I do something else. If I don't get my results with you, I'm going to try something else, Ian. And if that doesn't work, I got a bigger bag of tricks than you do, because I'm willing to try anything. This is, let me give you I tease Mark because I respect him, and because I admire what he does. Let me tell you something about him that I really respect, is his willingness to try anything in order to communicate with people. I've watched him spend a number of hours with people that he didn't agree with, and didn't have a lot of good reason to spend hours with, but did it anyway. Trying all kinds of different techniques. If this didn't work, you go, well, what about this? That didn't work again. How about this? Now, Mark has achieved something called the spread phenomenon, which means if you try something in one area, it usually generalizes. If you watch him dealing with women, you'll notice his same ability to generate all kinds of new behavior to produce the outcome he wants. Don't go interfere in his social life, but watch it at parties and gatherings. If technique A doesn't work when he's dealing with a woman, you can count on B, C, D, E, F, G, going through the alphabet 12 times, because he never runs out of behavior. He's a motivated persuader in that area.
A natural.
A natural. Actually, the women have referred to him as an unnatural. Now, if what you're doing doesn't work, do something else. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not asking you to lie, cheat, or steal. I'm simply asking you to be resourceful. I want you to be ethical. I want you to be honest. I want you to communicate honestly and honorably. But within the bounds of honesty, integrity, and so on, there are all kinds of options, different ways of communicating. There are all kinds of ways of getting your point across. Now, your effective persuader has a clear idea of what he wants. He's got a lot of flexibility. He's willing to do all kinds of different things to get the results he wants. And he's paying attention. That's the third step. He's paying attention so that he knows when he's got the results he's after. Let me tell you a good definition of most freedom advocates. And this is cruel, but hey, what do you expect? A freedom advocate is someone who can't take yes for an answer. He'll talk about freedom, and the guy will say, hey, I agree with that. Wait a minute, I'm not done. There's more. I agree with your position on minimum wage. Yeah, well, what about our position on the draft? Yeah, I agree with that too. I'll find something to disagree with. Just give me time. I knew a guy that used to do this with women. He would talk past the clothes, or in his case, the removal of the clothes. And he never scored. It was like, the woman said, hey, what do you say we go to, could we have a drink inside? And she'd say, yeah. And the dummy would sit there at the table for 4 hours until they fell asleep, and he'd go home. And I went, where does this guy come from? I said, so I've been looking for his number so he can join. Just in case that doesn't work out, he can join the Freedom Party. The difficulty is, once you got the results you want, anybody here in sales? What do you do after you've closed the sale? What do you... Get the cash. Get the cash. Get the cash. You got to remember, all these sales is so much trash if you, my friend, don't grab the cash. By that philosopher, Robert Ringer, and Winning Through Intimidation. That's the last step of the sale. When you got the results you want, stop. Write up the order. Sign them up to the Freedom Party. Once they've said, I agree with you, say, super. Come on in. We're having a meeting. We've got this going on or that going on. And that's true of all communications. Once you've gotten yes, thank them and leave. That's the hardest part in the world. You know why? Because you don't think they really understand it fully. So if you just give them a little bit more, then they could believe even more. If you really just talked a little more, then the sale would mean more to them. Now, those are three very simple parts of persuading. If you've got those three skills, if you've got those three things, knowing what you're trying to accomplish, being willing to try all kinds of different things to accomplish it, and knowing when you've accomplished it, very obvious, very simple. Let me tell you something about the obvious. Obvious means overlooked. Whenever you say, that's obvious, do yourself a favor, write it down. It's obvious, you better tell your partner you love her or you love him. Everybody knows it. Everybody wants it. It's common knowledge, isn't it? Does anybody here really hate to have affection and caring and love from someone you love and care and want affection from? I know there's some masochists that go, beat me. And of course the sadist goes, no. It'll sink in later for those of you who didn't sink in earlier. Now, with obvious things, like those three things, it's very common for us to think everybody knows it. I know it, you know it. It's obvious that minimum wage puts black teenagers out of work. It's obvious that minimum wage puts homemakers re-entering the job force out of work. Obvious means overlooked. Write it down. Obvious means overlooked. There was a story, Sherlock Holmes, the case of the purloined letter. Remember the case? This guy steals a letter, right? All right, he hot-foots it home, and the cops are on their way, and they're going to bust his buns. So he says, where do I hide it? Ah, I'll put it under the couch. No, they'll look under the couch. I'll hide it behind the picture. No, they'll look behind the picture. So he takes it and he puts it up on a letter board, on a bulletin board in plain sight. Obvious. Anyone can see it. They don't find it. Obvious means overlooked. It's obvious that you need to listen to people in communication. But we, as advocates of freedom, think our job is to talk and their job is to listen. How else are they going to get the truth if we don't tell them? Men, we think our job is to impress the woman with our prowess and our knowledge and our skills and our achievements. And she's smart enough to let us talk long enough to realize that it's not that impressive. This is why women are smarter than men. You give them enough rope, and they just hand it right back to you. You hang yourself. This is where the phrase, well-hung men comes from. I'm sorry, sometimes I go raunchy. Please don't forgive me. Pretend Mark said it. Okay. Now, there was a Sherlock Holmes story where Sherlock Holmes and Watson were talking. Anybody read Sherlock Holmes? Is it? I love Sherlock Holmes. Great stuff. All right. Sherlock Holmes says to Watson, Watson says, well, it seems to me we've got everything here going down pretty well. And Holmes says, excuse me, Watson. He says, you missed out on the barking dog. He says, barking dog? There was a dog in the room at the place of the murder. He says, the dog didn't bark last night. And Holmes said, exactly. Why not? The clue was that obviously the dog knew the murderer, otherwise he would have barked. Now it was obvious to everybody but Holmes that that wasn't a clue. But Holmes didn't overlook the obvious. Because what is not said is as important as what it is said. What is not seen is as important as what is seen. What is not done is as important as what is done. And that's obvious. Write it down. Anytime you have an urge to say it's obvious that this is the case, ask the person you're talking to whether it's obvious. About half the time they'll tell you it was not obvious to them. It's obvious to me if I make a mistake, I shouldn't have to apologize to my wife. It is not obvious to her, so I apologize a lot. Right? I just made a mistake. I wasn't trying to be mean, you know. Why did he ask me to go with him? I said, it's the library. I'm researching philology. You know, she thinks that has to do with Donahue. Don't tell her I said it. Go ahead, tell her. She'll expect it anyway. Now, it's a study of language, philology. Matter of fact, Nietzsche was a philologist. Oh, no problem. She didn't know. I didn't know either. I'm sorry. Thank you for asking me. It was obvious to me you knew what it meant, right? And she asked me. Very good. See? Another lesson taught. Now, it is very common for us to assume things. Do you assume things with your friends? You assume your wife knows this. You assume your husband knows that. You assume your girlfriend, your boyfriend, whatever. Your boss, your friend, your employee. You assume they understand it. You assume that they know what you know. Has anybody ever found later in some conversations that what you were assuming was mistaken? Have we had that experience? It's not uncommon. And we keep doing it. This is very important. If what you're doing doesn't work, keep doing it longer and harder. This is sort of like Polish dogs chasing parked cars. That's why they have those little short noses. Now, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. Do you like what you're getting? That's obvious, right? Write it down. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. It never ceases to amaze me when I have friends complain to me that their life is not going well. For example, I have a friend who's complaining that his wife doesn't understand. Now, I know no one here has ever heard that line. My wife doesn't understand me. This is his third marriage. Did your previous wife understand you? Nope. How about the one before? Nope. Oh. What do you do to enable her to understand you? Well, she should understand me. She loves me. Didn't work 3 times before, and now this is going to be the charm? He's going to keep doing what he's been doing. And guess what? He's still getting the same results with his wife that he always got. The only problem is she didn't deserve it. Neither did the other two. He keeps doing what he's doing. If you keep drinking, you're going to keep waking up with hangovers. If you go to bed with big dogs, you're going to wake up with big fleas. That's the way life works. That's obvious, right? It's obvious. Now, if what you're doing doesn't work, do something else. And do that in communication and do it in your job. Programmers. Let me explain. Do you know what user-friendly means? How many here know what user-friendly means in machines? All right, you're all wrong. All of you are wrong. User-friendly means the better you know how to use it, the friendlier it gets. That's what user-friendly means. Idiot-proof is impossible. There is nothing idiot-proof. There's always an idiot that can screw it up. And if he can, he will. All right, you got to understand, that's what user-friendly. You see, computers do not do what you want them to. This is very important. Computers never do what you want them to. They do what you tell them to do. Does everybody understand the distinction? My intention, dear computer, is that you give me the information I want. You push the wrong button, asshole. Oh, could you transfer my intentions into a program? Nope. Push the right button or I give you nothing. Sort of like dating. The fact is, if you don't do what's necessary to kick in the program, all your intents in the world do not bring it on the screen. They don't boot it in, now do they? No, they don't. That is because your computer is rational, and you are not, and I am not. I do the same thing you do. God damn you, what is the matter with you? And the computers are going. So I kick it off, and I do it right. And when all else fails, read the manual. So that's always a last resort with me. Now, if what you're doing doesn't work, you do something else. If what you're doing doesn't produce the results you want, do something else. And if you keep using that as a working program, if you keep changing what you're doing, sooner or later you hit on something that works just by chance. And that's equally true in communicating. Has anybody ever blown a sale? Those of you who've been in sales, you ever blown a sale and you're walking out the door and you know you've blown it? All right? How'd you like another shot at that sale? Turn around and apologize for being an idiot and doing it all wrong. And you know that they really wanted it, and had you not been so callous and stupid and so on, right, they would have bought it. And then ask them to save your soul by, look, I know you really wanted it. What was there that I could have told you that would have made a difference? What did I miss? Please tell me so I don't make the mistake again. And they'll tell you. 1 out of 2 times they'll tell you. And then close them again on their own point. You should have told me this. Wow, how could I have been so dumb? Now, anybody here watch Columbo? Columbo does that all the time. He keeps coming back. Just one more thing. Comes back in and it's always one more thing. It's always one more thing. He leaves, right? The camera stays looking at the door and you know he's coming back and you're just waiting. And this guy's going, I got the little schlep off my back. And, it doesn't work. That couldn't be. what he does is he comes back and he tries that other stuff. Now, in the mathematics of life, you want to be the independent variable. You want to be the one with the versatility, with the choice. This is important in communication. It's important in our jobs. If what you're doing with a computer program doesn't work, try something else. If what you're doing with your writing doesn't work, try something else. I had a friend that was a terrible writer. Has anybody ever had writer's block? I'm serious. You want a cure for writer's block? I invented a cure, and then I found out someone else had invented it before me and anticipated my efforts. If you want a cure for writer's block, I'll give you the following instruction. Next time you have writer's block, I want you to write the worst piece of dribble you can. That is your instruction. You're having writer's block, you're trying to turn out a good piece of work. I want you to write the worst, most incompetent piece on that subject that has ever been written. Go for something really bad. We're talking terminally bad. We're talking about life support system bad. You know what happens? Your brain can't turn out anything that bad. So it turns out something a little workable with. Now, if you do something dumb once, that can be a learning experience. But if you do it as a way of life, it's a bad habit. Right? I have a friend that continually gets fired from jobs. His name's Don Darling. And he is he's a red-headed Jewish man. He chose to be a Jew when he married, right? He took the faith. And he's probably done more to encourage people not to stay in Hebrew class than any person I can think of. Because he shouts. He's like Sam Kinison. He shouts when he's talking to you. Hey, Michael! I want to talk to you! Right? And he wonders why people keep backing up when he talks. It's a deafness problem, really. And I notice that he talks louder and louder and louder. And talk quieter. It doesn't work. He'll lower it for a while, and then he raises it back up to that high crescendo, so you can really hear him. It's important you talk loud if you're saying nothing important. It's important to talk loud if you want people to really hear you. I tried everything in the world. Nothing worked. So I asked him to talk a little louder. I told him I was having hearing problems, and I would keep raising the level. And he got to the point where he's finally... See, what I didn't work, so I finally said, Don, could you talk a little louder? I'm having trouble hearing you. Could you talk a little louder? A little louder? Right? You get hoarse and talk softer. You get hoarse. Please talk a little louder. I'm having trouble hearing you. What's the problem? Before I knew it, he was talking normal. What I did didn't work, so I tried something else. What I was doing wasn't effective, so I tried something else. I was doing it dumb once, and then I found out I was creating a bad habit. Now, there's nothing wrong with making mistakes. Let me tell you what a mistake is. A mistake is just a different outcome than you expected. A mistake is just a different outcome than you expected. Mistakes are nothing more than learning opportunities. If you're not making mistakes, it's because you're not trying enough new stuff. If you're on the steep side of the learning curve, you're going to make lots of mistakes. How many mistakes do you think Edison made on the way to the light bulb? You know, you got to remember something about Edison. Edison did not want to build a turbocharged candle. He wanted a light bulb, something a little different. He was willing to make a lot of mistakes to get it. That's equally true in inventors. That is true of painters. Is there any painting fans here? People that like different styles of painting, whether Picasso or whether the Impressionists? I really like Salvador Dali. All right, I liked a lot of Dali's work, especially his 20s through 30s years. I thought he did some very interesting work. So I bought books on how he painted, and it turned out that, you know how you'll see the final product, the great painting? And it turned out that for every so-called great painting he had like 15 or 20 preliminary sketches and early works. He'd work on something, that isn't quite right, and hang it in the room. Something that wasn't quite right, and hang it in the room. Before you know it, on like the 20th try, he'd get what he wanted, and that would be what he'd turn out. Turns out Picasso did that. If you go through early Picasso, you'll notice themes and leitmotifs. You notice certain elements from one painting ending up in another painting, if you watch it. Now, if you said to Picasso, I'm sorry, we can't accept this as a masterpiece because it's the 12th attempt you made. Those other 11 were mistakes. We're going to have to grade this down to a C-, Mr. Picasso. I hope you'll excuse us, but we're not going to give you the millions you normally get. mistakes were opportunities for him to learn. Do you see how that? And he was willing to do that. You got to remember that being willing to make mistakes takes an act of courage. Being willing to make mistakes is an act of heroism. That's an act of courage. Why? Because we are taught not to make mistakes. What happens if you make more than 10% mistakes in school on a test? You get a B, don't you? What happens if you make more than 20% mistakes on a test in school? What do you get? C. What if you make more than 30% mistakes in class, in school? You get a D. And what if you make more than 40% mistakes in class? What do you get?
A job in the government.
That's right. With tenure. See, I don't mind being a straight man. I find women like straight men. Mark will use that tomorrow and won't give you credit for it. You watch. Anyway, fact is, we've been taught. Do you know how many tests you're given from the time you go to the first grade to the 12th grade? Anybody have a clue? Over 3,000. Over 3,000 formal tests. Now, every one of those tests is teaching you something. It's teaching you that mistakes are bad. That if you make too many mistakes, you're bad.
I cry in anguish.
Sound like a gerbil on steroids. Hey, Ben Johnson and me. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that, but since I did, tough. Anyway, you are taught again and again and again in school that making mistakes is a sin. Making mistakes is a crime. Making mistakes is bad. Making mistakes it ruins your life. You have your parents, what are you going to get, B's? How are you going to get into a good college? I'm not going to get into a good college. I'm going to live with you and Dad forever. You're getting into a good college, by God. I'm not putting up with you. You're taught again and again and again that mistakes are bad. Now, let's look at baseball. If you make 7 out of 10 mistakes at bat, what do they call you?
A slugger.
A slugger. That's true. A 300 batting average is a slugger, isn't it? Anybody know what Pete Rose's lifetime batting average is?
282.
Should somebody know? This guy is considered a pro because he was able to get roughly 3 out of 10 at bat. But actually, his batting average was worse than that. How many strikes do you get at bat? 3. How many balls are you allowed to get? 4. All right, so conceivably, the average number of pitches that are made before you leave the plate is 5. He hit 3 good hits out of 5 pitches times 10. That means he actually got 3 hits out of 50 pitches. And that made him a Hall of Famer, or at least it will pretty soon. 3 out of 50 is considered a success. In school, you know what that is? Retard class. Right? Isn't that true? We've been taught in schools that mistakes are wrong and evil and will ruin you. But in life, I got a question for you. Suppose you're a salesperson, and suppose 20 people turn you down for sales during the day, and one person says yes, and your commission is $500. What is your commission? $500. All right? It's very obvious. That's a tautology. Now, suppose you only talk to 4 people, and none of them said yes. What's your commission? 0. Now, you might have a terrible batting average as a salesperson, 1 out of 21, and make a good living, because if you can talk to 21 people a day, that's $2,500 a week, over $100,000 a year. Is that a good living? Well, according to schools, you're a failure. You got to hang it up. I'm sorry, you can't keep the $125,000 because your batting average is too low. You've got an F average in sales. See, I remember that you were taught in school that making mistakes is bad. And I want to tell you that mistakes are okay. It's all right to make mistakes in communication. Now, that's half the sentence. You know what the second half is?
Don't make the same one too often.
Don't make the same one too often, and as long as the last encounter is done correctly, it doesn't matter how many mistakes preceded it. It doesn't matter how many no's you get out of a customer as long as the last statement is yes. It doesn't matter how many times people say, I don't agree with your freedom philosophy, as long as the last time you talk to them they say, I agree. All that is very obvious. I want to make you aware that mistakes is not bad because we've been so brainwashed to think mistakes is bad, we're unwilling to try stuff. Why do you think kids a lot of time won't go out for sports? They're afraid to look bad. They're afraid to make a mistake. Why do you think your kid won't show you? Does anybody here have kids? All right. You ever have the kids do the routine on the diving board? Watch me, right? When did they tell you to watch them? After they got it down, right? First time they're going to jump off the board, they're not going to say watch me because it might be a belly flop, and you point at them and go, ah, failure, 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 failure. Right? And that would ruin their ego forever, and they'd end up being NDP members. Right? Probably end up getting promoted to premier at some point in their life. We've been brainwashed to think that making mistakes is bad, and I just want to tell you that mistakes are opportunities to learn. It's okay to make mistakes on your way to learning. And I want to say that with communication, and I want to say that with every encounter you have. It doesn't matter if, when you and I talk, you disagree with everything I say for the first 20 minutes, as long as the 21st minute we start communicating. And I hang around long enough to do that. These are very obvious points, and we all know them. But obvious means overlooked. Now, I want to share a story with you. Oh, yeah.
I was just going to say that a lot of the times it has to do with perception, too. You're saying in school we're taught mistakes are bad because of the tests. But isn't the idea that you can make as many mistakes as you like in class as long as at the test you know the answer? Isn't it a case of the perception being that if you're paying attention to the learning process, you make your mistakes before the test?
That would be good if that were the attitude. But I found in school, as a matter of fact, what happens if you raise your hand for the answer and it's the wrong answer? Not only does the teacher go, wrong, but your classmates go, he didn't know. So in fact, we're not even given the right to fail in class there. It's very, very common. Social. You notice in a lot of ghetto schools, no one raises their hands because nobody wants to look bad. Looking good is important, right? Well, there's only way you can look good, and that's if you practice a lot up until the time you perform. So even in the classes, it looks to me as though we're taught that making mistakes is bad. I got to tell you, everybody I know that's been brilliantly successful in their own field did not do well in school. And it's because they learned the lesson. Mistakes aren't bad that the teacher didn't learn. That's why the teacher's a teacher instead of successful in a real field. Yeah. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. But you were thinking it, weren't you? Yeah, I could tell. Yeah, that's it. I can read your mind.
We're talking government schools, though, right?
We're talking government schools. In private schools, what they do is they go, I'm going to have to talk to your mother and see if I can raise the amount that they pay because you're making too many mistakes. Not to you. Now, there's something about... I'm going to skip that. Okay. There are a few things that we all do in communication that are very, very good. And as a matter of fact, we might not even know our strong points in communication. If you were doing nothing right, you wouldn't have gotten this far in life. If you were doing nothing wrong, you would have gotten a lot farther, and so would I. It's all right to do lots of stuff wrong. Some of the best communicators I've ever seen do things grotesquely wrong. I'll tell you something about good communicators that I've discovered. The only people who are always at their best are mediocrities. Your best people in any field, when they succeed big, and when they fail, they die. Has anybody here ever seen Baryshnikov perform? I have. I saw him on a bad night. I was lucky I saw him on a bad night. I'm glad I saw him on a bad night. Why? So I could look down on Baryshnikov? No, I looked up to him. Because I knew the only reason he had a bad night is because he had high standards and he kept trying to do more. And he worked with pain. The interesting thing that I learned there, the interesting thing I learned about successful people from Baryshnikov and some other people is, if you're unwilling to reach, you will not succeed nearly as well. I have seen the best speakers in the United States and Canada do very, very brilliant speeches. And I've seen them die. We're talking bad time. Bad. I saw Dr. Martin Luther King give a speech that was the worst speech that I think he's probably ever given in his life. He didn't even get applause from his own congregation. That's how bad it was. And I looked at it and I was wondering what was going on. He was trying something new because he didn't want to just stop with what he'd learned. I've also seen him give some of his best speeches. I saw Bobby Kennedy give a speech in Omaha, Nebraska that I liked. Bobby was up there talking. He says, I am very pleased to be here in Omaha. We are going to do great things for America. We need to move on into the future. And he had somebody in the front row who was heckling him. Go home, Kennedy. We hate you and your kind. Get out of here, get out of here, get out of here. And this went on during the speech. This is called good democratic politics in the U.S. And finally, Bobby had put up with it as far as he was going to. And this guy says, why don't you go home? And Bobby turned to his wife, Ethel, and says, Ethel, I have bad news. It's not going to be unanimous in Omaha. He was good on his feet, and he was able to deal with that kind of a heckler. And as a consequence, he was able to rise and be a good speaker. Billy Graham, whether you agree or disagree, is a good speaker. He's a very good speaker. And Richard Nixon, whether you agree or disagree, is a very bad speaker, among the worst. Nixon used to practice in the mirror, his public speaking, and so he screwed up his gestures. He used to do this on TV. And I want to tell you. And we didn't have videos then, and I swear to God, I wish I had films of this shit. People don't believe me when I tell this, but I swear to God, he used to do this. So, I want to tell you that I am not going to mislead you. Yeah, right, sure. Pick the dog up by the ears, Dick. Anyway, the reason these people were willing to succeed, and the reason they were doing well, is they were stretching. So I'm going to ask you during the weekend to stretch in certain areas. Now, nobody has to do any of this publicly. If you don't want to try some of the stuff, you don't have to. You may, in the course of the next week and the next month, be trying it with your friends and your business associates. If you find some technique that works very well for you, share it with your friends. That's the best way to learn something is to teach it. Matter of fact, there's an old statement in Esalen. Does everybody know about Esalen? It's a learning center in the United States where Fritz Perls and Salvador Munichen and Virginia Sater used to learn their psychotherapy. It was written up in Life magazine. So where they found out about nude therapy and hot tubs, okay? All right, this is the beginning of the touchy-feely movement in psychology. And the rule in Esalen is the following. We always teach what we need to learn, and the teacher is always his own worst student. Those are the two rules. But if you really want to learn some of the skills that we're going to go over the weekend, I want you, whenever you find something that works, teach it to a coworker. You'll get better at it as a consequence of teaching it. Hey, I found a great new way to communicate. Like in real estate, the first technique they always teach is the feel, felt, found formula. Does anybody know that formula? Okay. Works like this. Someone says, this house is too small. I understand how you feel. Okay, I understand how you feel. I agree with you. Many people coming in this house for the first time also felt the same way. However, they found that when they moved their family in that there was plenty of room and it was very, very comfortable. And that's a non-aggressive. What do you mean too small? You brain dead? Can't you see? Get out the tape measure, bitch. I'll show you. This is why real estate people end up on food stamps, that kind of stuff. Feel, felt, found formula is very simple. It's too simple, as a matter of fact. They teach it to you first week in real estate usually. And it's usually the new hot dog real estate people that are into it, get excited, use it, and sell like 10 houses because they don't know you're not allowed to sell 10 houses during a month. And then the next month they're a pro and they don't use it anymore. Then they argue with their customers and go broke. That's how they end up back at Tupperware parties.
The rest of it's not usually means failure of some kind. And I think every book I sell, it's a self-help book. It's for people that says, I was a real mess until I did this, and now I'm writing about what happened. I think they're all like that.
That's a very good point. Thank you, Mark. Yes?
And not only that, if you're natural, you can't teach it.
Oh, see, she listened to me earlier and she made that insight. That's right on the button. Thank you. Very good insight. Now, what we're going to do is every hour we're going to take breaks. All right? The mind will not absorb what the bottom can't endure. Okay, now, we're going to take a 10-minute break and we're going to come back and do 50 minutes. All right? We're going to start exactly in 10 minutes, so please be back on time. Stretch, walk around a little bit. Let's mention what I mentioned before. Those of you who smoke, if you would like to smoke over here in the back, that's cool. Just to sort of keep the fumes moving in a correct direction. Is that all right? All right, thank you. That's for the benefit of our smokers, not our non-smokers. I don't really care about the non-smokers, but I thought the smokers should have a special place. Anyway, let's talk about... Do you want to share that with everyone? I've always wanted to say that. Okay. Now, this section is called Why Arguing Rarely Works. You'll notice I hardly ever use words like never or always, because I've learned something, and that's that anything is useful somewhere. There's an old story about a cowboy going on a trip, and he's carrying 2 brown paper bags. And one of the tenderfeet says to him, "What's in the bag here?" And he says, "This is the whiskey in case of snake bite." "Really? What's in the other bag?" "Snake." Everything is useful somewhere. The most ridiculous, offensive approach to changing someone's mind will work with someone. The stupidest example in the world works with someone. The most ridiculous argument you've ever had in your life will work with someone. Ask Morton Downey. Someone else can do that. The fact is, and of course, the fact that something might work with someone doesn't mean you ought to use it as a regular tool. I'm sure Jack the Ripper had other social skills too, but I don't want him over for dinner, and certainly I'm not going out for a late night walk with him.
You'd be safe.
What?
You'd be safe.
I'd be safe. That's actually that. You reminded me of a story. I have a friend who was married. She was married. She's an attorney out in California. Very bright, really a neat lady. She's an objectivist. Comes from how many of you come from a background in Iran? Anybody? Okay. Those of you who do would recognize she was Dagny Taggart type in the real world sense. She really is a producer and a brilliant woman. And she and her husband were getting a divorce, and she sort of fell out of touch with me. And then I found out through a gay friend of mine, male friend, who writes for Playboy, John Nettinger. He said, I said, "Whatever happened to so-and-so?" And he goes, "Well," he said, "she gave up men." I said, "Really?" And he says, "Yeah, and she took on women." And I says, "Oh, really?" Turned out that she had realized that she had been gender confused, misoriented. She determined that she was a lesbian. And I said, "Oh, that's interesting." And I said, "I wonder why she's been out of touch." So I called her. Her phone number obviously was changed, but her place of business called her up. I said, "Carol, how are you?" And she said, "Michael, I haven't talked to you for a couple of years." And I said, "Carol, you haven't been out of touch. What's new?" That doesn't tell me anything about her personal life. So I figured, we've got a communication problem here. She might not know that I'm cool on these issues, because we were not, she doesn't know what a trashy past I've lived. Anyway, so I said, why don't you and your friend come up and stay with Vicki and me for a weekend? And she says, "Well, how much did John tell you?" And I said, "Well, John told me enough to make me realize that while I'm safe in the shower, Vicki isn't." And she laughed and laughed and laughed. And I said, "Carol, I don't care if you're gay." I said, "That's wonderful, you know. I'm glad you found somebody you love, and I'm cool. And my relationship to you has nothing to do with who you sleep with. You're a neat person." Right? And you just reminded me of with the story that I don't know what the connection was, but it turned out that
You'd be safe with Jack the Ripper.
I would be safe. Yes, I would be safe in the shower. Right? And Vicki wouldn't. That was the connection. It had nothing to do with anything, but it'll mean something to you later.
When you figure
Maybe. See, everything's useful somewhere, is Michael's theory. Now, arguing. By and large, arguing is not an effective strategy. Now, let me distinguish. I do not mean that presenting evidence or presenting arguments in the sense of logical reasoned points of view are not useful. I'm referring to the activity of, in effect, debating people. Is that distinction clear? Does everybody understand that? Who doesn't understand the distinction I make? Arguments, in the sense of putting together rational pieces of evidence and reasoning with people, is totally appropriate. But arguing, as in the sense of debating them, rarely changes their mind. Has anybody here ever seen a public debate between a socialist and an advocate of freedom? And at the end, had one of them say, "By God, you're right, I'm wrong, I'm sorry. How could I have been so shallow and stupid? I want to apologize to everybody in the audience for wasting their time. You should have just invited this person to have a talk." Doesn't happen, does it? What happens usually is both sides walk away even more sure that they're right. If you ever have anybody that you're having trouble getting them to be a committed advocate of freedom, get them to debate somebody who hates freedom. They'll get committed real quick. Get them in an argument. Boy, they'll bear down and they'll support their position even more. When you're arguing, and that doesn't mean debates aren't useful. Debates are useful, but not in the sense that you're going to change the other debater's mind. They're useful because you can change the audience's mind. Okay, now, so it can be useful. But I want to make you aware that knock-down, drag-out intellectual arguments with people usually don't work. Those of you in sales, what happens if you argue with a client? Who loses?
Both.
Both. Very good answer. Most people would say, I do, but in fact you both lose, because if you got something they want, and if they want it, you've mucked it up. Shame, shame, shame. Arguing. What happens when you argue with somebody? All right, let's pick domestic arguments. Among your sweetheart, the person you lust with your loins with, the person you care about, the person you really like spending your day with. Let's say we have an argument where you know your partner is clearly wrong, and they don't yet. This describes most of the arguments we have with our partner, right? I have them too with my partner, but I found a very simple way of dealing with it. I just immediately admit I'm wrong, and I leave. It drives her crazy. She begs me to argue with her. No, I won't argue with you. You have to. No, can't make me. We're going to discuss this. You're right. I don't want to argue. Now, what happens when you get into those arguments with your friend or your spouse? What happens? At the end of it, do you walk off feeling more sure that they're right? Does anybody here feel you walk away and say, "Boy, my partner's convinced me what a schlub I am," or that I really you have good reason to be convinced?
Yeah. No, I was going to say that has happened occasionally.
It's happened occasionally, but usually after one of those arguments, don't you walk off and say, in effect, they don't really understand what I meant. Otherwise, they'd have my point of view. Have you walked off with that kind of feeling? Anybody had that? All right. How do you feel after an argument with your lover, friend, partner?
Well, I think everybody always feels frustrated. That's probably the key emotion you'll feel.
How many people agree with that? Raise your hands. Do you feel a little frustrated? All right. Now, I'm not talking about knockdown, drag-out Virginia Woolf battles. Those usually lead to really great sex later. Those are you vented all your bad feelings so you can feel good and get in bed and be friendly. All right. But frustration is very common. What other feelings do you experience when you have arguments with somebody you care about? I'm talking about serious arguments about stuff.
Defensiveness. The first thing is you feel like you're personally being attacked as though you don't have self-worth.
Who else feels that way sometimes during it? Who else knows their partner feels that way during it? You're not paying attention to your partner usually. You walk off feeling I'm right, they're wrong, or they didn't understand me, or they were attacking me, or my personhood, or something like that. What happens is usually people get very defensive and they're usually over chicken little arguments. They're really dinky arguments like whether you agreed to meet at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock to go to dinner, whether you were going to go visit so-and-so because you both want. Remember we agreed we'd go over to the Smith's house? No, we didn't. You pressured me. You told me that you'd go. Am I supposed to not trust you? I didn't say that. What I said was that, oh, and you didn't mean it? Those kind of arguments. Those are the kind of arguments that cause divorces. Yes, Mark.
I don't know if this messes up your presentation.
Oh, please go ahead.
But in my experience, all those kind of arguments are really just calls for attention anyway. The argument is actually secondary to what's really going on.
That goes back to games. There's more here than meets the eye, said Mrs. McGillicuddy. Usually there are, you're right, there are calls for attention. There's no rule in New Age thought that says the thing that's bothering you is not what's really bothering you. When you say, my partner never listens to me, if you really paid attention to how you're feeling, what you really want from them maybe is love or attention or caring, or maybe you want them to say, I'm paying attention to you, or maybe you want them to spend more quality time with you. But I want to point out that all arguments, I just looked at personal arguments there for a second, How many of you have engaged in political debate with coworkers at some point in your life? How many of you have won those political debates? Okay. And how many people, even after having won them, didn't win the person over? No, you can win them in the sense that all reason and facts were on your side. I remember having a debate with a woman named Becky Wycliffe. Becky worked for a Southern politician named Woody Jenkins, who was a client of mine. And Becky says, I don't understand why you people believe in a non-interventionist foreign policy. I think we ought to sort of kick the shit out of the Russians and then go after China. And now here is a woman who didn't believe women ought to spend time in combat either. You know, real courageous position. I'll make those sweet pies while you boys die. So anyway, I was arguing a non-interventionist foreign policy, and I presented good reasons for it and showed how it was in the best interest of America and the world in general. And I went through about a 10-minute presentation and gave a really cogent defense of a non-interventionist foreign policy. And at the end, she looked at me and said, so? And I said, yeah, but this and this and this and this and this. And she says, yeah, so? And that was her way of getting me. In other words, you gave me your best argument, you didn't convince me. Go ahead, try again. I know why. I know why. And the interesting thing was that the argument didn't work. And it didn't convince her, and it didn't bring her around. Usually when we argue politics, there are a whole bunch of psychological factors that get involved. There's the I'm not going to let you win factor. If I admit I'm mistaken, I admit I'm wrong. There's something inadequate about me. I'm weak, I'm worthless, I'm bad. I don't have proper self-esteem, I'm not a good thinker. All these psychological motives get mixed in with the argument. It's nothing. Have you noticed how political arguments, if they were just over the facts, we wouldn't have so many diverse political viewpoints. I mean, the facts are what they are, and they're verifiable, and we can check them out. So why do you end up with different viewpoints? Well, you've got different goals, and you also have different people with their own vested interest in certain points of view. A lot of the arguments are not about arguments, and when you get involved in them, ego issues become involved. For example, I've watched usually, not always, usually when men and women argue politics. See, there's a way life is broken up. All right, here's the real breakup of life. Men, we get to make the important decisions. International treaties, the nature of philosophy, important issues in science. Women make the insignificant decisions like what we're going to do for a living, where the money is going to be spent, whether we have kids, what kind of a home we're going to have, and what our life will consist of. And this is the division of labor in most families. I have noticed that when men and women, and that's cultural, all right, we're brought up that way. I've noticed that when men and women argue, guys will very often refuse to allow the woman to convince them because, by God, she's a woman. Women, have you ever seen that happen? Have you ever? Does it or does it not occur? Is that not correct?
Well, those are perceptual problems that happen.
Perception. Just spoken like a man. Now, what's interesting is that that's equally true in political viewpoints. I have had discussions with minorities who say, the only reason you believe that is you're white. And I said, shit, I'm white? I thought I was Oriental. You're kidding. I had the eyes fixed and you didn't know? I mean, how do you answer an argument like that? Yes?
All right, I'll be you.
You'll be you.
You just turn around. And so I recommend that to everybody. Just switch positions with that person right now. And if you were there, what would you be thinking?
Oh, yeah. That's very good.
I was going to ask about that as a concept that I've heard about in other things. If you really want someone to be convinced, if the object is you convincing them this won't work, if you want them to be convinced, if that's the main goal, tell them, okay, you argue my position and I'll argue yours.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do the best I can to argue your position. You do the best you can to argue mine.
Mm-hmm.
And if providing they have the information to do it, they will often proceed to convince themselves and save you all the trouble.
Yes, that's true. Now, yes.
There's another problem you can run into, though, and I'm just reminded of a situation in South Africa where a debate took place between a liberal thinker and an apartheid.
Mm-hmm.
And the liberal thinker conclusively proved to the man that economically apartheid was just a bad thing. I mean, it was obvious. All the figures and everything proved it.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy said, well, that may be so, but this is the way we like it.
Boy, this hard to argue that. But you know what it's like? Has anybody here ever watched Alf? Willie goes, Alf, you destroyed the living room, you blew up the car, you ruined everything in the house, you flooded it, you ordered 6,000 pizzas with anchovies and styrofoam. We're broke now and they're repossessing the house. And Alf will look at him and go, yeah, so? What's your point? That's the same kind of answer you get there. What I want to point out to you is with arguing with people, when you directly confront, when it's viewed as an adversarial situation, when it's viewed as an adversarial situation between you and them, it won't be an issue of the facts and the truth. It'll be an issue of ego. It'll be an issue of psychology. It'll be an issue of interpersonal problems. And all of those will stand in the way of them understanding what you want them to understand. And you understanding what they want you to understand. That kind of adversarial situation stands in the way of their communication. Now, I don't mean you should never argue. It's fun. I like intellectual bantering as much as the next guy, presuming, of course, that Mark is the next guy. And I enjoy that. It can be a lot of fun. You can do that with your friends. I have socialist friends. I have a Christian friend who, he and I have been arguing the existence of God for a long time. God, however, is not partly on it, so I'm not really quite sure on this. He and I have been debating this for 12 years. We're still good friends. And neither of us has changed our mind, which is especially incredible because he's wrong. and he ought to know it, by golly. And I always call him up and tell him that. I said, I realize you've got to defend this because of ego considerations. And I realize, of course, that you'd have to give up a way of life and acknowledge you've been wrong for all these years and wasting my phone bill. But you know you're wrong, and I know you're wrong, so why don't we just agree on that and we can get on with other discussions? And he laughs because he knows I'm teasing him. Even reasonable people, even rational people, will have ego considerations in confrontational arguments. By and large, the less confrontational you are, the more effectively you can persuade and argue. You can argue without being disagreeable. You can argue without being confrontational. You can present evidence and arguments without having an adversarial relationship. Just as you point out, just using a simple technique. You pointed out switch places. You pointed out have each person argue the other person's point of view.
That doesn't work, I'll get to that.
So, sometimes you can make it work. And I found 2 or 3 ways to make it work. Which reminds me of a story. It seems that the king had 2 sons, and he didn't know who to lead the kingdom to. He wanted to make sure he made a wise decision. And he said, sons, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. He said, I'm going to decide who inherits the royal position based on a horse race. And the kids go, hey, that's great. He said, whoever has the slowest horse will be the next king of this kingdom. Well, this wise man said to him, wait a minute. They're going to pull back on their horses. And the king says, oh, I've already considered that. I'm having them ride each other's horse. You'll find out who's got the slowest horse. Because he's going to ride the other like there's tomorrow, right? Now, arguing with people in a demanding, confrontational way usually doesn't work. And let me give you an example in the area of questioning. Everybody here has seen Columbo, right? Has everybody here seen the original Perry Mason? All right, Raymond Burr, which is a great series. All right. Do you notice the difference in the style in interrogation done by Lieutenant Columbo? They're just sort of bumbling. Maybe I messed up here. How does that work? You know, straighten me out. Now compare that to Perry Mason. Isn't it true that on December 4th, 1972, you were engaged in sex with a chicken. Now, it wasn't just an ordinary chicken. We're talking about an underage chicken. And didn't you do this in front of Colonel Sanders? Speak to the jury. And then, of course, Berger stands up and says it's irrelevant, immaterial, and what's the third word he always used?
Prejudicial.
Prejudice. No, that wasn't the word. It's irrelevant, immaterial. It'll occur to us later. Now, the difference, it wasn't prejudicial, it was another word. I keep forgetting it. Is it?
Well, he would be. And that's only 2 out of the whole room, but
2 out of the whole. I once went to a trial where a man was accused of stealing. They brought in 3 witnesses who saw him steal, and the opposition brought in 8 people who didn't see him steal. And it seems to me you may be right. You may be right. All right. Do you notice the difference in style? Now, everybody thought when it was on, Perry Mason was cool. That's the way lawyers ought to be. They ought to be, slice them up in the witness stand. But Columbo, in his bumbling kind of non-threatening style, was able to get more information out of these really clever people than Perry Mason was. Perry Mason had to hire a detective and pay him, had to sneak around behind other people's backs, and Columbo just had these people telling him what they were doing. How is it that... Maybe I missed something. Mrs. Columbo and I were out the other night, and she said, how could that... And I thought about that, and I thought, why didn't I think of that? So, how did that happen? And this guy goes, well, blah, blah. Ah, that's right. But if that was the case, and he does it in a non-threatening kind of way, and the person just hangs himself. Now, I use those as examples because they're very divergent. Perry Mason came in a confrontational, aggressive, threatening style, right? When he had the witness in the witness box. Columbo, who would ever be threatened by this clown? Look at the car he drives. Look at the old coat. He smokes a stinky cigar. He's dumb. Look at him. He's got no culture. Who could ever get caught up by Columbo? They all did. Every single one of them. That's equally true in Persuasion. The worst thing that can happen to you is you can get a little overdose of testosterone men or assertiveness training women. The worst thing one of the worst things that can happen to you in a discussion is when you start doing that, strutting your stuff, I'll show you kind of thing, because it doesn't work. If you want to produce good results in communication, you have to make it easy for the person to listen to what you're saying. What happens when you think someone's going to interrogate you and you think they haven't got your best interest at heart? Are you very careful about the answers you give? Are you cautious what you tell them? Do you think twice and 3 times and 4 times? Do they have to drag information out of you? Remember when your mother used to say that to you? Do I have to drag every detail out of you? Yes, you do, because you're trying to get me. That's why she's got to drag it all out of you, right? This is equally true in communication. Now, there are a lot of ways of being non-threatening, non-confrontational, and communicating. Most of them are very, very effective. But I want you to be aware that the more threatening you appear to the person you're dealing with, the less willing they are to hear. It's awfully hard to listen to somebody when you think that they're trying to ram something down your throat. Here is the standard old style, and Mark will remember this, the old style Freedom Party method of communicating ideas. Here's our philosophy, open your mouth. What do you think? Well, usually people like to chew before they swallow. And usually people like to take little bites. People don't like to have ideas rammed down their throat. People don't like the intellectual equivalent of a rape. Because when you try and ram ideas into someone's mind, they resist, and they should. They want an opportunity to consider them. Now, let me give you an analogy. If we were playing cards, and it was us against the advocates of big government, socialism, fascism, statism, collectivism, call it what you will. I call them thug looter mystics. Even-handed. Now, if you were playing cards with them, and your cards, as an advocate of freedom, individual freedom and property rights, if you laid your cards on the table, and they laid their cards on the table, who has a better hand? Do you feel that you've got a better hand? Do you think the facts are on your side? The truth is on your side? A better society, better for the poor, better for the rich, better for the middle class? Do you think we maybe have solutions to a lot of the problems that confront Canada and the U.S.? Well, if that's true, then you can afford to be generous. You can afford to be kind. You can afford to show good manners. You can afford to be non-threatening when dealing with people so that they can consider your hand carefully without being threatened by it. Arguing with people in an aggressive way usually doesn't work. Does that mean you should never argue? No, it's a great exercise. It's fun. I love nothing better than debate socialists. I think it's very important. You know, you don't want them to spend too much of their life thinking people like them. I do cruel things to people that I don't like. I play mind games with them. We used to have a guy named Bicycle Bill at the University of Arizona. They call him Bicycle Bill because this is in the days when it was uncool to ride bikes. This is like 1970. And he was a socialist. He was the socialist. And he would set up his socialist table, and I would go and pick up his brochures and take them and walk off with all of them. And he'd come screaming, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I said, "Well, Bill, I'm trying to redistribute the wealth. There are people in need kindling." "You son of a bitch! What's the matter with you?" And it would sort of raise his blood pressure all day, and that was good. He would be very bad at dealing with people. Tee off a lot of the third world students. I always asked him for his checking account number so I could redistribute his wealth from him to me. I know what you're saying. Why didn't I think of that? There's nothing wrong with engaging in those kind of arguments for practice, and on campuses that can be useful. If you find someone that you know you can't convince, try an argument on them. They'll let you know where the holes are. If you've got an argument against these hyper-Marxists, and you want to try it out on somebody really, really bad, find one of their worst exponents. Try it out on them. Nothing wrong with that. But when you're talking to normal people with decent, hormonal levels, with appropriate thought processes, people who are able to think, communicate, able to hold down jobs, people that don't live off the government, then you want to deal with them in a non-aggressive, non-confrontational, non-offensive manner. If I had to give you one sentence in how to persuade people in terms of the style, just ask yourself a basic question. How do I like to be communicated with when someone disagrees with me? How do I like? Now, there are going to be times people disagree with us, and we need the information they've got. Would you agree or disagree? Okay? Would you want to have the information if they had some information that would profit you? All right? Now, granted that you're not going to find it palatable at first, and you don't have it, how would you like it to be communicated to you? Because that's the best way to communicate to other people. The answer is not aggressively and not "I'll show you," and not arguing with them, because arguing rarely works. Now, we're at about what time? Oh, good, 11:13. We're going to take a lunch break at about 11:50 or noon. Okay, and then we're going to come back after. We'll take about an hour and 15-minute lunch break. Okay, and we're going to go 15 minutes longer at the end of the day because we started a little late. But I want to move into the next section because is that it? That's it. Politics is personal. One of the most difficult things to communicate in politics is the real impact of programs. We're used to talking in high-level abstractions. Minimum wage injures the poor. Okay? Everybody here know what that means? No? I'll take my word. I'm not going to. This is not a setup. You sort of know what it means? Minimum wage versus poor. Now, we haven't talked about any one person. We've talked about a group. The poor. Minimum wage. We're talking high-level abstraction. Let me tell you something. One of the best approaches that I've ever discovered in my whole life in selling, communicating, sharing ideas is to personalize every idea you have. Underline that word. Personalize every idea you have. Let me give you an example. I went to the United States Air Force Academy in 1969. I was appointed by Morris K. Udo. I dropped out after a year. I read Ayn Rand and realized I didn't like to be folded, spindled, mutilated, and so on. And I said, what am I doing here? And I said, gee, I shouldn't be here at all. I'll leave. So I left. After I left, I discovered that I had not completed my military obligation. Military obligation means the government considers you property to be disposed of at their convenience. And this is during the Vietnam War. Now, everybody here, it seems like I've been watching these anti-war movies and these pro-war movies. There's been an attitude over the last couple of years that the Vietnam War somehow was a misguided adventure. It was not a misguided adventure. It was an evil adventure caused by government. It had no legitimate purpose. None. Underline the word none. I got involved in the anti-war movement in 1970. How's that for a flip-flop? You go out of the Air Force Academy and into the anti-war movement. And I was a draft resistor. I refused to be drafted by the United States government. I was not a conscientious objector. I was opposed to the whole concept of the draft, and I refused to be drafted. And I was prepared to go to court, and they decided I would not be the kind of guy they wanted in the military. Actually, I went for my physical. Does anybody here from the U.S., anybody ever done the draft stuff? They take you in and you get to meet with guys like Jim Class, right? They count your arms and legs, make sure there's 2 of each. Yep, he's breathing, Charlie. He'll be a good person in Vietnam. And then they make sure that you're mentally healthy enough to kill other human beings. And make sure your trigger finger is still there so that you can pull the trigger. And you know, it's like join the army, see the world, go new places, meet people you don't know, and kill them. You know. And I got involved, and what happened was they decided I was not the kind of guy they wanted in the field. What happened was when I talked to the psychiatrist, he said, "Do you have any mental problems?" I said, "No." I said, "I'm morally opposed to the Vietnam War, and if I go there, I'm going to start underground newspapers, we're going to steal supplies, I'm going to blow up our own munition dump, I'm going to organize the soldiers, we're going to shut down your goddamn war. I want you to know that we're putting an end to that. If you bastards don't know how to unplug it, we're going to do it. We're going to frag officers, especially guys, how many years you been in? Yeah, great. If you're over in Vietnam and you see me, better run." And we're all going to be doing this. It's not good military. I was considered a clear and present danger to the effort.
Didn't they just throw you in the can for that?
What?
Don't you just do time? I mean,
No, because as a matter of fact, I wasn't breaking any law. I just told them what I intended to do. Right? They were trying to draft me, and if they wanted to draft me, I would have been willing to be drafted. I'd have done my duty as I saw it.
And there's only one person saying it, so it's not conspiracy.
Of course, and there was no one else in the room, so if the psychiatrist would have repeated it, I'd ask him how long you had these hallucinations. Did you deal with your mother well? Do you have an Oedipal complex? Oedipal, schmedipal, as long as he's a good boy and loves his mama. Anyway, I found that what really worked was after I was involved in the anti-war movement, I was talking with people about the war, all right? And we were trying to get out of Vietnam at the time. Nixon didn't know how to get out of Vietnam. You know, just bring the troops home. Your commander-in-chief, nothing to it. Sign the order, bring them home. No, that's too simple. I'll think of something complicated. After it was all over, people wanted to forget about the war. And they wanted to have a new adventure somewhere else, you know. And I realized that people didn't realize the impact of war. War is a big abstraction, isn't it? You know, you see a guy come home with the merit badges. You see him come home with the medals, and you see him wearing the crisp uniform. And we all remember the good war, World War II. We have to fight the Nazis after they bombed Pearl Harbor, right? You figured it out. I never figured it out myself. All right? And what I started doing is, I couldn't communicate to people what war was all about. You communicate war is evil, it kills large numbers of people. It did not sink in. And then I found something that sunk in. And this is the technique and approach that I want to recommend to you about politics in general. And that is, I made it personal. I said, you know, I went to the Air Force Academy. My dad was a U-2 pilot, flew over Cuba during the missile crisis, was decorated by President Kennedy. I come from a military family. I understand how important America's defense is. I said, but you know, let me tell you something about the Vietnam War. I graduated from high school in 1969, and kids I double dated with, children, 17-year-old children, came home from Vietnam in bags, plastic bags. Kids that I double dated with. I used to go over to their house and play ping pong in their backyard. A 17-year-old boy. And I have to put on a clean suit, and I have to look his mom in the eye. And remember the times we spent over at his house having Coca-Cola and pizza. And they can't even have an open casket funeral because somebody blew his face off. A child. And I got to say goodbye to somebody I hardly knew. That's what war is. But it didn't stop. It wasn't just one. There was 4 of my high school friends, a guy I wrestled with. He wrestled 154, I wrestled 138 pounds. And he's back in a box, and they're not even sure it's all his own body. And his mom is there crying her heart out. What do I say to her? What do I say to that woman? He died for a good reason? No, he didn't. I'll miss him. He had his whole life in front of him, and he was sent there by somebody who didn't know him, who'd never been to his house, never double dated with him in the backseat with his high school sweetheart to go to a movie. That's what war's about. That's what war is about. I went to 4 of those. And then I couldn't go to anymore. Not because they stopped, but because I couldn't take it. That's what war's about. I got a question. Does that connect to you? Does that connect? Everybody's got a high school sweetheart they knew. Everybody's got a friend they knew. Everybody's got a 17-year-old kid or a 15-year-old friend or a niece or a nephew or a child. We all do. Now that's not just true of war. I thought about it and realized when I started telling those stories, I started connecting with people in a way that I had not connected before. And I thought about it and I identified it as a specific approach to persuading. Let me tell you, anytime you can personalize, make it very personal, one person, one human being, one black child, one Hispanic young girl, one Oriental young boy, and tell that one little boy's story about what happened to him in minimum wage. What happened to her when they decided to unionize the factory. Has anybody ever worked in a business where they unionized after you've been working there? Did you know anybody that didn't go along with the union plan, didn't like it, and really got dumped on? If you tell one of those people's story, that tells more than if you tell about unionism. What you do is you personalize it. I want to be very clear on what you tell people about this one person before everything occurred. Here's a guy that we used to go out and bowl together. You ever go bowling together? People go, yeah, we've gone bowling together. Right? You tell him how it was. He'd drink Millers, and I'd drink Leblons. He'd drink such and such, and he couldn't hold his liquor, so I always had to drag him to the car. What a schlub. But he's a good guy. Loved his family, took good care of his kids. And one day the union came in. This guy grew up in a family where he believed that you put in a hard day's work for every buck. And he didn't believe in unions, and he worked and worked and worked and worked there, and he put in more work than the boss asked for. Matter of fact, he was probably in line for the next promotion. The union came in, and because he didn't have as much seniority as the other guy, he got fired. Here's a guy who works really hard for his family, and he got fired. Now think about it. Why do we go to work? Because you're told that you believe in these values. If you work hard, you'll get rewarded. And if you do a good job, your boss will like you. And it's important to do a good job. And you personalize it with this one person. And you tell what happened to him and his wife. And you follow this story after it's over. Then it's not just an issue of unionism, some big abstraction. It's an issue of one guy. You know what happens when you tell a story about one guy? They generalize for you. They know that there's more Sam Smiths than just a Sam Smith you know. They know there's more Julie Drummonds than the Julie Drummond you talked about. They'll do the generalizing. One of the beauties of Atlas Shrugged, one of the things I really liked about it was, do you guys remember the wet nurse? Remember the character? Oh, I could never get through that part 2 or 3 times without inking my page up. It really connected to me. Ayn Rand personalized what happens when people teach their children not to think and stand in the way of them learning and thinking for themselves and being self-reliant. And she made it very personal. She made one person, followed what happened to this person all the way through the book as he was figuring out what had happened. And then had him as a tragic figure. That did more to connect to me than some abstract discussion about the role of reason in man's existence. Did it do it for you? Yeah, Mark.
I was just going to point out, too, the most effective argument for statism also employ the same methodology. Drug driving occurs to me as being the most effective statist argument by showing you real people who are really hurt and killed by these really awful people who drink and drive. And the most effective arguments for statism are always ones where they make very personal.
Check it out. They figured it out. It's an important, useful technique, and it doesn't matter what you're talking about. Economics. Everybody thinks about economics as a dry science. Okay? Who can give me one personal example about someone who's gotten screwed over with some statist piece of legislation? Does anybody know one specific personal story about it? Your own or someone else's? Mark?
Oh, I know hundreds, of course.
Give me one.
Well, the number of people I know who have been ostracized by unions, I mean, several individuals have been, like Lloyd used to, I don't know if you know, but Lloyd used to work at Westinghouse, well, still does, of course, but now he's management. But while he was with the union, he had to deal with just tremendous ostracization for his political points of view and for his work ethic. He always believed in working very hard, and the union was resentful of that. And he believed that he should be working for the employer and not the union, and because he said so explicitly, this made it extremely a hostile environment because the union wanted him to work for them, and that the employer was the adversary who had to be combated on a daily basis. And then he felt, of course, this was all wrong. And they really tried to do their best to get rid of him in every way possible because he represented a living, breathing, walking threat to their whole statist mentality. That's just one person I know. I know dozens of stories.
And if you ask, I'll bet if you asked him to tell what kind of ostracism occurred, he'd tell you about the time he was at the coffee machine and people had bumped and spilled his coffee. That doesn't seem like a lot, does it? Spilling the coffee is no big deal. But can you imagine every time you get a soft drink or get a coffee, someone's going to bump you and knock it out of your hand? Can you imagine going to your car and finding somebody did a little cut in your tire? Can you imagine every day trying to say hi and belonging to coworkers and have some of them convinced that you're the enemy?
There is a happy ending to that, though. He always held his head high and stood up for it and never intimidated. He eventually started convincing other people, which made him, of course, even a worse threat. But he started getting a grudging admiration of almost all of them. When eventually they left him alone, he started getting recruits. Because those tactics that the union used eventually did intimidate their own members to realize that these are unhealthy, very immoral practices.
But see, there's a very personal example about how one man stands up and what one man happened with him. You were going to say something, yeah?
I wanted to point out that, okay, I didn't like the drunk driving example of personalizing arguments. I've noticed, I've been in debates, like in high school, you know, discussing the difference between freedom and statism in whatever form it happens to be rearing its head. And yes, they always go very personal, but they also try to mention as few facts as possible. And you said that you'd like us to be ethical. I think it's very important that you don't lose sight of what it is you're trying to convey.
Sure.
Yeah, facts never win anybody over.
No,
but
but
you got to include them. You got to include them. It's all fine to get them all weepy-eyed and feeling sorry for this poor soul, but if they're statist-oriented, they're going to try and find a government program to help them.
You get their mind up later.
Thank you for pointing out something that I missed. It's very important to personalize it. I don't mean to the exclusion of what it means, not to the exclusion of the principle. But whenever you're presenting a principle, for example, minimum wage hurts blacks. It's not at all uncommon for us as advocates of freedom to point out the facts. Every time you raise the minimum wage law, black teenage unemployment goes up 11 to 14%. This is a racist piece of legislation. And every white bigoted employer who needs a reason to fire a black kid just got one. And needs an excuse to fire a black kid just got one. That may be true. But if you move from there and then give the personal example, let me give you one example that I'm aware of. So-and-so who's a black teenager is such and such, and give them that one story. Or so-and-so coming back into the job market. I know stories about women coming back in the job market. Did that happen to you? Going back on the job market, how hard it is to get back in. My sister was a single mother. My sister dropped out of high school because she got pregnant. And married the guy. And came home one day and found him trying to strangle my nephew, who was 6 months old at the time, because the baby was crying too much. My brother My sister got him out of the house and called my brother. My brother drove down and put her in the car and put her on a plane and sent her to my parents who were living in Omaha, Nebraska. She was living in California at the time. My family would not tell me for 2 years what happened, because they know that if you ever injure an animal or a child in front of me, your life is in peril. I will not tolerate it. I personally will not allow it to occur. And by not allow, I don't mean yell. I mean, I've decked a couple adults for slugging their kids. And I've never gone to jail for it either, so cops have a good attitude toward this. But I remember watching my sister get back into the job market. Here's a girl that dropped out of high school, had to go back. Now get this, she went back and got her GED. Here's a personal story. Your story, she should have been on welfare. GED means graduate equivalency diploma. It's like you've got the equivalent of a high school diploma. She dropped out, could not get a job. So she worked at sub-minimum wage babysitting. Why did she work for sub-minimum wage? It was all she could get. And she refused to be on welfare. Why did she refuse to be on welfare? Because she considered it wrong? Because she considered it unethical? No. She didn't want to demean herself, and she didn't want to get stuck in that cycle. She consciously knew what she was doing. She got a high school equivalency diploma. My parents helped her out. I gave her some pocket money out of my own pocket. And they helped take care of my nephew. Now here's a girl coming back in with no job skills. Not the smartest girl in the world. Trying as hard as she can, not giving up, not quitting. She goes to work in a hospital in Tucson, Arizona called El Dorado, which was just being built. And while they were building it, she worked in the housekeeping department. Let me demystify that. She was a maid, okay? She's a maid. Housekeeping. Maid, okay? She went to work there for minimum wage. Well, she moved up a bit. She went to work there for minimum wage, and meanwhile, I was helping support my nephew with what I could afford at the time. And my sister was busting her chops learning the job. She worked there as they were building it, and as it got built, she learned as much as she could about her department. She moved up from being bottom of the rung up a couple rungs. She was up to like 60 cents an hour over minimum wage. I mean, she was really cooking. And she started taking night school courses to learn her into the business good. Housekeeping is a very difficult part of a hospital. It's like running a hotel. You gotta have sheets, you gotta have all kinds of, it's a lot of work. And it's management skill. And she had bosses brought in over her because they had college diplomas. And they brought 3 bosses, and she was always doing their job. She finally got tired of it. I paid for an assertiveness training course for her. She's my sister. And she took courses in a night school at Pima College, which is a 2-year junior college. All right, still didn't get a diploma there, just took the courses so she could learn the skills. And she finally went into the head of the hospital and said, look, I've been doing these men's job. For the last 2 guys you fired, I was doing their job when they were doing it well. When I stopped doing it, you fired. I've got another guy who doesn't know his elbow from Shinola. See that I clean it up? Was that good? Doesn't know his elbow from Shinola. And you're going to pay him really good money, and I'm going to do his job. Didn't your mother bring you up not to be a sexist? She took a chance. And she says, you come down and look at my department. You ask the people I work with who does it. Don't ask him. This guy's still got water behind the ears. He's still got training wheels on the feet. And believe it or not, he came down there and looked at it, and my sister ended up running the department. Here's a girl who had every reason in the world to be a loser, had every reason in the world to give up, had every reason in the world to just sort of lay down and die, or at least that's what the statists would have you believe, right? And this girl's a living example of what feminism really is. You want to see the women's movement? I'll tell you what the women's movement is. From $3.50 an hour to making about $1,800 a month. That's women's movement. And she made it on her own. She did very, very hard work. Here's somebody that was kept down because of institutionalized learning. Now, to me, that's a very personal example of what one woman can do. She did that pretty much on her own, with a little help from her friends. We all get help. The system would have put her on food stamps. They tried to put her on food stamps. She refused. They tried to give her food stamps, and she refused. They tried to give her rent assist housing. You know what that is? That means you get to live in a nice neighborhood, even though you haven't earned enough to live there. And so your next door neighbors are making a good living, and you're not, but nobody knows, because we pay the difference out of the government. But you know. And she wouldn't do it. And as a consequence, she was able to get on her feet and achieve. Now, to me, that's very personal. Now, you don't want to lose sight of the principles, and you don't want to skip the principles, but I want to make you aware, anytime you're communicating an idea about freedom, personalize it. Not always, but it's a useful approach. Now, you can do that with minimum wage. You can do that with foreign trade. How about free trade? How could you personalize free trade? What would be an example of one way? Just, I don't need a description, just one way. Yeah.
Free trade is the easiest argument. Free trade between people in the room. The fewer barriers you have, the less loud you have to yell. The less distance you have between two people, the quieter you can communicate, the less confrontation. The fewer barriers between my house and your house means it's easier to get from my place to your place. And then you can expand that from, London, Ontario to Montreal. The fewer barriers we have, the easier it is for us to trade goods. There are endless corollaries. Because after all, everything is a trade. From talking, looking, seeing, breathing, it's all a trade. If you're breathing out, for every reaction, there is an opposite equal reaction. So
I knew that.
So for fewer barriers you have, the more easy it is. And of course, we all want to gain as much as we can with this little physical effort.
Okay.
And free trade shapes.
How about let's look at the regulations that separate the U.S. and Canada prior to this alleged free trade agreement. I call it alleged because it's not free trade.
So cool.
That is the free trade what rape is to voluntary sex. Okay, I'm sorry. Other flash, macho flash. Okay, what happens to a Canadian that wants to buy something that's less expensive in the States? Let's say that you've got a shoe manufacturer in New York. French Schreiner is a shoe made in New York, upstate New York. It's the most comfortable shoe that I've ever worn. I like it. I'm wearing a pair right now. Okay? Now suppose French Schreiner's can be made. They're made by union labor. I'll do business with unions if they make the product. Who cares? All right? Suppose the French Schreiner is cheaper than and less expensive to wear than a shoe made in Manitoba. Okay? But under the laws, you can't buy the French Schreiner, which is maybe closer to you than Manitoba is. All right? Now you say, well, what's a pair of shoes cost? What's the big deal? Well, the family that pays an extra $20 for a pair of shoes, that's $20 they don't have to spend for a Christmas present. Or a new shirt or a new blouse. That's a very personal thing. We forget about that. We're not personalizing it. Every time you make a barrier to free trade, who pays for it? The consumer does. The consumer pays for it. Every time you can't buy a less expensive belt or tie or coat or pair of pants or pair of shoes, that's less money you have to spend for that one night out a month that you've got with a person you love. The toy for your kid for Christmas.
In my neighborhood, that 2-4. That would be effective persuasion.
Yes.
Okay, now this type of personalizing wouldn't have worked in the States. It's typically Canadian slant. The fact that when Canadian businesses can deal freely with the U.S. consumer market, we've increased our market share by 20 times. It's not the same way the other way around because our population is so much smaller. Personalized, okay, you got a group in the room. There's 5 people in this group. Everybody's manufacturing something. They can only trade with each other. There's 45 people in that group over there. They're all manufacturing something, but they can trade with 45 people. If you can only sell one product to each member of your group, it doesn't matter whose product is better. The person who's got 45 people to trade with is going to do better than the one who's only got 5.
So it's very clear that making free trade for Canada allows the 26 million Canadian citizens to really benefit by selling it to the 260 million U.S. citizens. Sounds to me like we're screwing the U.S. Great, let's do it. Because that's a reverse macho flash, and that's tomorrow.
Oh, but everybody will move down to move their industry down to the States where there's lower wages, and that'll cost jobs in Canada. What am I leaving out here, folks? There's more.
Social programs. We're going to lose our social programs.
Actually, all right, now, what I want to be real clear on is that any time, you don't use every argument everywhere, and you don't use them on everybody, but what I'm pointing out to you is that when you personalize your position, when you show the impact on one person, it's not enough to say minimum wage hurts the poor.